This is PT Pro Talk, the podcast for physical therapists who want to improve their clinical skills and be more successful. I am Ariana Parks, physical therapist and your host, and today I'm joined by Amit Kaglani for a conversation about how he grew his practice to over 100 offices across 15 states by partnering with private equity. We discuss his business journey, key business metrics PT owners should track, marketing tips for small clinics to stand out, building systems and structure to support growth, and more. Amit's a physical therapist turned entrepreneur and business coach who scaled his practice and achieved successful private equity exit. Now, through AG Management Consulting, he helps healthcare practice owners grow, streamline operations, and build high-value businesses. If you find our conversation informative, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell for updates, give us a thumbs up, and share this episode with colleagues who could benefit from these insights. Thank you for tuning in, and now let's dive into the discussion. PT Pro Talk is only possible with the support of the forward-looking and innovative companies like Sarah Health. Remote therapeutic monitoring sounds great, but also difficult. Sarah Health makes RTM simple and easy for your patients and providers. Check out sarahealth.com/PTProTalk for a special offer.
Welcome to Urban Polling. Discover the Activator program and polls for rehab and balance.
Hi, Amit. Welcome to PT Pro Talk. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. So let's just get started talking a little bit about yourself and your background and all the things that you did so far.
Yeah, so I'm a PT. I have an OCS because I just loved orthopedics ever since I started. I'll tell you a fun fact about me. I went to undergraduate studies here in America, but I went to physical therapy school in Scotland. And I tell people all the time it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. Somebody that I knew convinced me to go there because of the amount of clinical and manual therapy time that we had there, and it was truly great. You know, that started my journey. I came back here, started practicing. My first clinic was in an outpatient clinic where it was a heavy sports medicine and ortho environment. And I absolutely loved it. I would go home and study all the time. And that made me want to go into becoming an OCS. So it's fun stuff. You know, I really love outpatients. I just love the energy about outpatients and everything about outpatients. You know, seeing faces, being able to diagnose them quickly and start treating them, you know, it was just very fun for me. And then 30 minutes or an hour later, you got another patient with another problem that you have to quickly be able to know what to do with. So I just love that environment. So yeah, that started my journey as a PT. And then it wasn't until I don't know how many years later that I actually got the bug to go into business. And I'll tell you that story, you know, briefly.
Yeah, I want to know what prompted you.
Well, yeah, actually, I didn't even have the idea in my head. I was my boss at the time liked what I was doing. He said, "Hey, will you open a clinic for me?" And I said, "Okay." I did that, and then I opened a second clinic for them. And as I was doing it, a patient of mine said, "Hey, you know, you should read this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad." And I had no idea what it was. And I said, "All right." So I read it, and that's when it all of a sudden, like, something hit me over the head. Like, you know, I'm doing this for somebody else. Why wouldn't I consider doing this for myself? Let me start thinking about this. Then he gave me another book called E-Myth, and I started reading it. I'm like, I could really do this myself. That made me want to look into opening my own private practice. And I did. I opened up my own private practice, quickly realized I don't know anything about business. I don't know what I was doing. I was like, I have no idea what I was doing. You can't just build it and people will come. It doesn't work that way. You know, here I am treating patients like, oh, this is the easiest part of my day. But I was like, how do I get patients? So I started asking friends of mine, like, you know, what are you doing in private practice? You know, what are you doing? They would all give me their opinions, right? But as a PT yourself, and as PTs, we know that we don't treat patients based on other people's opinions. We based it on solid facts that we've learned through data, through like research, that what is the best treatment techniques. Well, I said there's got to be something very similar when it comes to business. You're not just winging it all the time. There's got to be something that's research proven that this is how you're supposed to do stuff. So I started looking for a school or some kind of education that could teach me how to run my company. And I found a company that trains people to become a CEO of their company. And I did that for 5 years. Now, mind you, I opened my private practice. So I would have to close it for a certain amount of time, go get educated, come back, apply that, go, you know, close it. So it was back and forth. So it took 5 years. Yeah. So it took 5 years. I did it. But then I started noticing the speed of my growth started really accelerating. I made mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I still made mistakes, but they were smaller mistakes and I could recover faster. And I knew, and I had a strategy of what I was doing. So that made me feel good because I felt like I had a little bit more certainty, right? Because we're all good at treating patients. If you're good with patients, you can get them from A to B. But if you don't have a plan, it feels like, what are you doing? And that's how it felt in the beginning of my business. So that started me off in like really just accelerating my company.
Okay, so when did you open your first clinic? Do you
2004?
remember?
Yeah,
Okay.
January 2004. I remember when I opened my first clinic. Yeah, because I remember doing all the insurance paperwork months before that. And of course you make mistakes because you don't know what you're doing, and then you wait, and the insurance company says, "Oh, you filled it out wrong. You got to fill it out again." So yes, I remember opening in January.
Before we continue our conversation, I wanted to take a quick moment to present you to our sponsor, NeckCare.
Traditional neck assessment methods often fall short of providing a full picture, overlooking movement control and sensory motor integration. That's why a physical therapist developed the NeckCare system to provide reliable assessments of sensory motor integration, proprioception, and range of motion. With objective data and visual results, physical therapists can better understand neck impairments and design targeted treatment plans for optimal outcomes. If you treat neck impairment in your practice, visit neckcare.com to learn more.
And now, let's get back to our conversation. And then, so in that period, what happened? Like, what were the challenges when you first start your clinic that made you think like, okay, I need a formal training. I don't know what I'm doing. So like, what were the struggles at first?
Yeah. Well, you don't know what you don't know. You think that, this is going to go smooth because you know how to treat patients, but then you quickly realize that I'm not a PT anymore. I'm a business owner. So I need to start thinking like a business owner, not just like a PT, because sure, you have to be able to treat patients, but if you don't know the business side of it, you're not going to last very long. So I realized I need to understand systems and processes and how things kind of fit together and how I'm going to make this business work for myself. So that was some of my challenges. Now, I'll tell you some smart moves I made in retrospect. I opened a clinic inside of a gym. So I had access to all their gym equipment. So I didn't need a lot of money to buy equipment initially. Right? I just had a small space and I used all their equipment. That in itself brought challenges as you're growing because you can't just go back and forth from the clinic to your private room. But that's okay because once you have cash flow coming in and money coming in, it's easier to solve problems than having no money coming in. And then the biggest challenge was, well, how am I going to get my next patient? How will that work? Like, I don't have a database of any patients. How am I going to get my next patient? So I had to start marketing, quickly realizing I don't know how to market. I'm just sitting here in waiting rooms waiting for the doctor to call me. They give me 2 seconds of their time and then they leave. Maybe they send me a pity patient because they felt bad for me. But really, I didn't know enough. And I'm like, I can do a good job. I can do a good job. Trust me. They're like, yeah. We got 10,000 of you coming in every single day. So my challenges were how to set up a system where I can actually continuously get more and more new patients.
Yeah.
Those were my early challenges. And I didn't know anything about billing, so I hired a billing company to do my billing, which was something I would never do my own billing because that was a whole animal I don't know anything about.
Yeah. And then when you went to study on these 5 years, so then you learn more about how to structure marketing and everything that you feel like you needed to know?
I took courses literally in how to talk to doctors, it was called. Literally, they would tell you how to talk to doctors. You would have somebody that you go against, and they act as a physician, and you have to be able to get your point across in a succinct manner. There was a whole 3-day course I took on it. It wasn't just them telling you what to do. You did drills. On how to do it, different scenarios, on how to do this and how to do that. But it made a huge difference. Like, that's how I started getting, somewhere. Because if you go walk into a doctor's office and say, I want to talk to a doctor, they don't know you, and they honestly, you're just in their way and you're taking up their time. So there's a better way of doing it. And, right now I train some of my clients on how to do it. Some of the smaller clients, they don't have large marketing budgets, right? They need to start like grassroots efforts. So I show them a business plan, a marketing plan on how to do it from a grassroots effort to try to get some traction. And literally that's what I did. And yeah, I had to learn marketing. I had to learn the business aspects. I took courses on how to hire and fire people. because if you're not hiring the right people, it ends up hurting you in the long run.
And on these 5 years, there were different courses, or you did like one course, many different? Okay.
Many different courses that I took, like How to Talk to Doctors was a 3-day course. I shut my practice down for 3 days, took the course, came back, put it into play for the next 8 weeks, then went back, took a different course, but it took time to take everything because, the truth is that was the best way because you had to implement. You can't just learn everything, absorb it, and then, be done with your education. You had to implement as you go along. Otherwise, you lose all relevancy of what you're doing.
And what do you think that made the most difference in your practice after you studying, doing all these courses, and then went back to your clinic? What is something that you think is like essential?
I can't say there was one specific course, but I will tell you just getting educated on the business side of it was the biggest difference because I had more certainty. It's the difference in, for any of your listeners who are a specialist inside of physical therapy, it's like being a generalist one day and then being a specialist the next day. You see how you're practicing now as a specialist compared to how you were practicing as a generalist. You have so much more knowledge. You have so much more certainty. You know what to expect. You know the time frame of what to happen. That's how it was after I had taken all my business courses. I just had a lot more certainty. I had a plan laid out. I knew who my next hires were going to be before I even hired them. I knew the metrics that I needed to achieve. I knew the margins that I needed to get. I knew the output in my marketing to expect a certain input. It just made a lot more sense. Prior to that, it was just like, let me try this and see if this works. Let me try this to see if this works. It was just a lot of me spending money on things and then just wasting that money.
No structure.
Yeah, because I wasn't trained in the business, right? At that point, I was trained in how to treat patients. So just because you're a PT doesn't mean you're great at business,
Yeah, no,
and the
absolutely.
trap that a lot of business, people fall into is what they don't realize is they don't own a business. They own a job, They basically start their own practice because they want to practice a certain way. But the truth is they become a slave to their own job. So before, when they work for somebody else, they work for 40 hours a week. Now they work for themselves and they work 60, 70, 80 hours a week. But they still feel that trapped feeling because they haven't figured out those systems and processes to give themselves a little bit more life. So, and that's what I work with clients on how to set up those systems and processes so your company continues to grow without you feeling like you're losing your anonymity and I shouldn't say anonymity, your autonomy and your freedom.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense because that's something we don't learn. And we don't. You just have no clue.
We don't, yes. I continued down that path for several years until I realized I was reaching a point where I had about, let's say, 12 clinicians, a bunch of different offices. And I was like, okay, well, I still want to increase my business, but I'm starting to kind of have problems in the fact that I was too small to negotiate my rates with insurance companies. And insurance companies would bully you around. And you would feel the feeling of, well, the insurance is going to pay you this much only. Reimbursement rates aren't increasing. My expenses are increasing more and more. What was I going to do? Was I going to partner with somebody else? Was I going to sell? So that's when I decided that my best option was to partner with a larger entity that we could use to help negotiate larger rates.
Okay, so let's go back to when you open your first clinic, then you start to grow into other offices. That's what happened before you decide. So to get to that point from clinic 1, then what happened? You start growing and having the need or the desire to open other locations. So how that process worked from that point until you decided to partner with a private equity company.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, and this will happen to, yourself, other clinicians, the more order that you put into your own company, opportunities will present themselves to you. Because these opportunities are people that are being attracted to you because they see that you are systematized, you're doing a good job, things are consistent with you, you're not just flying by the seat of your pants, and it's noticeable to other people, and people will gravitate toward that. And that's what started happening with me. The more that I would put structure into my company, other people would get attracted to it. And so physicians that I knew would get attracted to it would start saying, hey, I want to meet with you. And then one meeting led to the fact that, hey, I am a physician. I don't use my office that much. I have 1,000 square feet. I want to sublease it to you so you can utilize it. I'm there every once in a while, but I'm happy to prescribe therapy to my patients because I'm a physiatrist, so I prescribe physical therapy all the time. That opportunity would not have come if he thought we were doing a bad job.
Mm-hmm.
So because we were doing a good job, we were systematizing everything. That opportunity came, so we opened another office, and I had hired another therapist at the same time. So they took over what I had current space in the gym, and then I opened that one. And then more opportunities kept coming like that because we kept expanding, going from one therapist to another therapist, and then other opportunities kept creating themselves.
Mm-hmm. And when you get to that point, as you mentioned, the reimbursement rates were not increasing, your expenses were increasing. So what are the options? Like at that point, you get in that position, then so what do you do now? So you have what options, in your opinion, people have?
So at that time, I wasn't a practicing clinician. I had stepped out to manage the company. So the options at that time would be that if I want to increase my margins, and I have to jump back in to start doing PT again full time.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I was only doing vacation coverage and things like that, spot coverage in case there's emergencies. And I was basically working on my business constantly. So I had to ask myself, do I want to, give that up and go back into treating just so I can keep, the margins good, or do I want to make another plan, And the idea was that if I go back into start treating again, sure, my margins will be good, but I felt like I had the ability to do much more than at that point just treating my patients, because I figured I could hire good clinicians. I could train them to do what I was doing and replicate that. But I couldn't get somebody to take over running the company properly the way I needed to continue to grow. Because as we grow, more opportunities come to my employees. The more I can pay them, the more I can do for them if the company continues to grow. But if it doesn't continue to grow, then I don't have those opportunities for them. So I'm doing a disservice to my own company by jumping in and jumping into that role. So that's when I asked myself, but who would be a good partner for me in this thing? Because ACOs were taking over, accountable care organizations, hospital structures were starting to buy over the primary care physicians and telling them where they have to send their PT. Oh, you have to send them to the hospital. You can't send them to independent clinics anymore. So you kind of start feeling like, okay, something is changing here, so I better change. Mm-hmm. That's when I started looking at existing physical therapy companies that are large that wanted to buy us over, or private equity companies, that had money but that wanted to buy you and then keep buying PT clinics so they can consolidate all the costs and they can have higher margins. Okay, and that's I looked at those different options at that time.
Okay, so how would that look like if a bigger clinic buys you versus a private equity company like you did?
Yes. Okay. So this is all part of the due diligence process that I did. I looked at the different things of what was going on in my landscape. If a strategic is known as a larger physical therapy company. If a strategic comes and buys you over, they're buying you because they want you to be the production part, right? They want you to see patients. Sure, they'll put a couple $1 million in your pocket, but at the end of the day, they want you seeing patients. They don't want you managing. Okay. At that point. So their expectations of me were we want you to see patients all day long. Okay. And that's what your life then becomes. Now, for some people, that's great. They love being a clinician. They love treating patients. At that point in my life, I had kind of stepped out of that role and I was managing all my clinics and running it as a CEO. So for me, that wasn't ideal. I did not want to be a small fish in a very large pond. I wanted to be a big fish in a small pond. When I looked into private equity companies, there was a private equity company that was getting started, but that didn't have any healthcare in any of their verticals or any of their investments, and they wanted to add on a physical therapy company. So I was one of the founding people in that, which means I was one of the first partners that came on. Okay, so I was one of the first people that came on. And then we had others, and then we started acquiring other clinics, and we grew to about 100 clinics in 15 different states.
That's crazy. Okay.
So and their model is basically they have the funds, they buy over clinics, then they consolidate all the billing and they consolidate all the cost structure. So not every company has their own billing anymore. They take that out and they have one billing department. Okay. So they can control that, and they can control a lot of the different things to decrease the cost. Okay. And that's what we did. And I took on various roles there. One of my roles was National Director of Payer Relations. So now I was responsible for negotiating our insurance rates with the various carriers throughout the country. So now I had the opportunity to drive a higher reimbursement, which I couldn't do before.
Because you have more companies, so you have more power to negotiate?
Because we had more offices, we had more power to negotiate. That is exactly right. We're servicing so many thousands of patients across so many different states. So geographically, we are going to the largest insurers, and we can say, we can see your patients in all these geographic regions, and so we're able to control the costs. We're able to control our message out to our clinics. So if you want a consistent therapy, instead of going to that many individual owners, you can talk to us and we will drive our metrics the right way and things. So at the end of the day, they don't want to just give you money for giving you money. There's something in it for them too. Either easier process, your rate of discharge is a healthy rate. You're not over treating the patients. You're not under treating the patients. The patients aren't complaining. So, we would manage those. I would always have to do my homework on who I'm talking to and what are those factors that were important to them.
So you have to kind of understand what are the metrics they're looking for and make sure that you're reaching those metrics to have a good relationship with them.
Correct. That's exactly right.
And then on the bigger PT group, so they, when they buy you, are you still like an owner? Do you still have a piece of the company, or you become then an employee? So how does each negotiation is different? What generally happens?
As part of the private equity group, or as part of it can be very similar, just it can be very similar in both of these examples. They'll give you ownership shares of your clinics and how you do. Okay. And a lot of times they give you common shares, which they just kind of pool together. And those common shares are how well the company does, as well as how well does your offices do that you directly owned previously. So depending on how it's negotiated, in most cases, the private equity group, when they come in, they're buying majority ownership. So they're buying 80% of the clinic or 20% of the clinic. Sorry, not 80% or 70% of the clinic. They don't usually do 50-50 because they need to control everything. They can't have one person saying, I'm not doing this, and another person saying, sure, I'll do this. They have to usually own majority of it. So they'll pay you for your what they call your enterprise value, which is how much they valued your company at when they first got you. Whatever that 100% is, if they're buying 80%, they're going to give you 80% of that. And the other 20% just rolls along with it until the next acquisition comes. When the next acquisition comes, then your 20% gets cashed in for whatever that new value is worth. So if your company now has increased in value, your 20% is worth way more than it was when you first started.
And in that example of the private equity company, then you would be working with them on the business side as well, versus on the big PT group, then they want you more as a clinician, right?
In my circumstance, yes, but not in all circumstances. Sometimes even in those circumstances, they want you as a clinician. Mine was because I was one of the founding people, and at the time they needed to grow and they needed help with their C-suite and things like that. So I purposely chose this company because they needed me for the business stuff that I knew, as opposed to me just treating patients.
Okay. And then what happens next? So when you decide to do that, you wanted to sell your company because you want to grow, right? So what is the final goal? Do you want to sell the company to make more money, or do you want to continue to being part of the company until it gets bought again and then you get a bigger piece? So what is the end goal on that structure?
Yes. So some of the end goal isn't always in your hands, because most of these agreements have something called a tag-along, drag-along feature, which means that you are selling a portion of your company and now you're helping the new entity that you're with to grow even more. Okay. You still have a percentage of that, right? So you are incentivized to help it grow. You want to see it grow because it was your company. Once it gets to around 5, 7 years, usually that's the life cycle before another entity comes in and buys it over. When they buy it over, either they can pay you out for your remaining shares or they can drag you along to the new company and that you work for them there. Depending on what you want to do. If you don't want to be a part of it and you want to retire, then you let that be known and then they will cash you out. If you say, hey, I'm too young, I want to continue to grow this, then you continue to grow this as long as they want you to.
Yeah.
So in that case, the goal is, hey, I want to continue to grow. I'm too young to retire. I want to continue to work.
Mm-hmm. Because then you still own a piece of the company. The more the company increases in value, the more money you make as well. Versus,
yes, but your cash is also tied up because if you're 20% owner still and they don't let you cash in your 20%, now your 20% just sits there. So depending on what your incentives are and what you want to do, some people are, they work really, really hard to get to that point so that when that point happens, they say, okay, I don't want to work anymore like this. I'm ready to take my 20% off the table. Give me my 20% and just pay me a salary and I'll just work like everyone else does. Or some people say, no, give me only 10% of that 20%. I want to keep 10% in it and I'm ready to go to work and work hard. Pay me a salary plus my 10%. So it depends on the conversations and what somebody's looking for.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then, so what happened with you in your story of growing? So you partner with them, then you said that you grew from 4 to 100 clinics, right? And then what happened next?
What happened in 2021, we decided that we were going to reach out to see if people were interested in buying. Turns out, in retrospect, that was the highest multiples that people were doing. Basically, it was the best time to sell the practice before 2022 and interest rates started going up. Of course, we didn't know it at the time, but our transaction completed at the end of December 2021. So it was the best time that could have happened. And then a larger private equity came and took over, and they have strong aspirational plans too. And that's when I decided that that's for me, that time was over. So I took my funds and then I exited the company a certain amount of months later. And then I started doing, private coaching and other things in real estate.
Okay. And like for those PTs they have a few offices like you had in the beginning, in your opinion, they can just like keep growing on their own, or like at that point they have to partner to be able to grow?
No, people still grow on their own, but I will tell you it is very hard depending on where they're geographically located because certain states have better margins, certain states have really bad margins. So if you're in a state that has very bad margins and high expenses, it's very hard to keep growing, because you don't have the margins to be able to do that. The larger companies have higher negotiated rates, so they're offering people way much more in salary than you could even afford to offer. So what that does is it keeps you as a mom and pop owner. So you're a practicing clinician in your practice, and it's hard for you to hire. It's hard for you to really get out of that cycle, So some of the clients that I work with are trying to grow. So we're helping them by putting systems in their practice so they can step out a bit so they can start to work on their business instead of in their business. And to help them get to a point where when they sell their practice, it has significant value. So that's one thing that I did, that before I decided to sell, I talked to all the different companies that were interested. Some of them were strategics, like larger PT companies. Some of them were private equity companies. But I got a sense of how do they calculate their valuation of my company? Because no matter what, my goal was to get that calculation to be the highest possible calculation it could be. So therefore, I have more options. So after that whole process and after I sold, I went back and I did some business certifications in exit planning and value creation for business owners. And the reason I did that is because I want to be able to help other PT owners to try to get the maximum sale value of their practice. And there's things that we can do that actually brings more value. So when somebody comes to you with an offer, it's going to be a high offer, as opposed to such a low offer. You're going to say, I can't retire on this. I can't, this isn't going to work for me. Which a normal PT won't know what those metrics and how to do those things that are valuable to somebody buying. So in my case, I was able to get a very high multiple on that, and that made a big difference for me.
Mm-hmm. And why you think you're able to get that? Because of how you structure everything at that point?
Yes, because of how I structured it, and I sat down and I figured out the numbers, and I figured out how to create that. Now, I didn't know all the business stuff that I know now, but in part I got lucky. In part, I just did a lot of homework. But now I know the exact metrics that what people are looking for, and that those metrics have changed over time anyway, because private equity has been now in this area for a long time and has been buying clinics and things like that. So, it's more formalized. It's more it's more set up right now than it was before. So following a certain model to create that highest in value is what, ultimately I seen clinics when I was part of the private equity company that we would, look to acquire. But in certain situations, you had a person that was getting older in age. They had built a practice based on all the work they do. And all their life, they had been a PT there, and they were just tired. And when I say tired, they were just tired of the business. They just didn't want to worry about their next new patient. How am I going to pay payroll? I have all these people that are working for me, and I'm working harder just so I can pay them. They said they would just come and say, please just take my clinic from me and just give me a job here. Okay. Now, by doing that, they left millions on the table that they could have actually got by selling their practice, but they couldn't because they didn't structure their practice in a way that was even sellable. So, and that really stinks to see an older person go through that, where they just didn't structure it the right way. So because of that, the value of the practice was not much there. So they didn't have something they could really sell. So instead, they just walked away from that. So that's partly what I want to be able to help those other, companies with.
Yeah. And that is because they had a job, and they didn't have like the owner had a job for himself, just working as a
PT,
as a clinician. Yeah.
Yeah, they were responsible for everything. That company ran because literally, they did everything.
Mm-hmm.
So without them there, they didn't have a business. So therefore, nobody can give you money for that because God forbid you get into a car accident, your company's not worth anything.
Yeah. Okay, so if like now going back and looking at everything since the beginning, what would you tell to a PT that it's a business owner or wants to start their own practice? So like what would be like a quick, like step-by-step that you would recommend people do based on your experience?
So I think a lot of people have to realize they have to work on themselves. Okay. They may be good clinicians, but that doesn't mean you're a good business person. And when you're starting a business, you have to tell yourself that I'm no longer a clinician, I'm a business person. And I have to start acting like a business person. So that means that when it's time to collect copays, you're collecting the copay. People aren't ready to do that. They're not used to handling money, right? They have to be able to tell the patient, yes, because PTs in general want to help people. They don't want to deal with the money. But when you're a business owner, you have to deal with the money. So you can't just let that go. And you have to form policies and procedures and how things are handled. So once again, you're a business person now. So that would be the first thing, to understand that you're no longer a clinician, you're a business person. You're a business person that owns a clinic and is responsible for giving good care, but you're still a business person. So if you don't make the right choices for the business will no longer exist.
Yeah. And do you think it almost feels like it's easy if you separate yourself from treating versus owning the business? Because then you can have the role as versus if you are treating, like you have the empathy with the patient. I just feel like it's much harder.
It is. That's why it's so hard in the beginning, because it's you by yourself and you have to wear both of these hats. You have to wear the business person hat and you have to wear the clinician hat. So in the same sentence, you're asking them for money, but you're also treating them. So it's like it takes a certain type of person to realize that, hey, I no longer can just act like a clinician anymore and just give away services. Like your time is worth a lot of value, and that you have to, if you don't believe that it's worth a lot of value, patients will never believe it's worth a lot of value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I would also tell the clinicians they have to think with the end in mind. Where do you want to end up? Do you want to make this something that you want to be able to sell for a high value? Or do you want to just be able to pass it along to, your children or something like that? And I would say, even if you're going to do that, it does not hurt you to create a high value company, because then you're passing along something that has a lot of value.
Mm-hmm. Versus you just having a job and then when you're tired, you leave without nothing.
Well, I have talked to definitely owners that I call them lifestyle owners, right? They're lifestyle practices. They open at 9 o'clock, they're done at 3 o'clock. They don't want to hire any clinicians. They don't want to hire, it fits their lifestyle. They want to go on vacation, close their clinic down. They don't want somebody substituting in. Now, this is a lifestyle practice, but that practice doesn't want to grow and is not sellable, really. And that's fine because it meets their goals. They don't have high aspirations. That is their aspiration. They just like doing that. There's nothing wrong with that. You just have to know who you are.
Yeah. And if you are the one that wants to grow a business that has value and want to sell,
then that's where you have to put systems in your place. And that's when you have to wear the hats of I'm a business owner now, not just a clinician. And you have to understand, like, what are my margins? What does every decision I make, how does it impact the company?
And then if people that are listening to us, they're like, okay, I understand all of that. I have to have systems, metrics, structure. So how do I start?
So I've talked to therapists who want to go into PT to own their own practice, and they have a neuro practice. And they like, yes, I have this technique that I do, and it really helps a lot of patients. I'm like, well, how many patients can you see, per hour? They're like, we see one patient an hour, maybe we see 3 or 4 patients a week, or 3 or 4 patients in a day. And I said, have you done a business plan to see how much you have to charge that person? Because in network reimbursement, there's no way you're going to survive. You're not going to be able to pay your bills. So the first thing is writing down a business plan with realistic numbers. How much is your rent? How much are your expenses really? And how much is your income going to be? Or what income do you need to be able to handle your expenses? That all has to pencil out. And you have to give yourself enough of a margin between the two that the business makes sense. If you can't do that, you shouldn't start yet.
Yeah.
That would be the first step.
Yeah. You definitely need some training to help with that.
And then you also need to have a marketing plan, because you have to figure out, how are you going to get these patients? Don't think so there was a popular movie called Field of Dreams. And in that movie, there was a line that says, build it and they will come. That's not how PT works. You can't build it and they will just walk in saying, oh, you're here. I've been waiting for you. No, nobody knows that you exist. So you have to have a plan on how letting the community and everybody know how you're going to exist.
And what were a few things that you felt was really good and powerful marketing wise versus what you were thinking before you start studying all of that? Like you said, you go and you're trying to call doctors and all of that. And then after you study, what were some maybe good tips or things that you can share with us that would help people that are struggling with marketing?
Yeah, so they need to think a little bit differently, because I'm assuming everybody that's going to be listening to you are going to be individual clinic owners, right? They're not going to have a huge marketing budget. So how do I do it on very little income, very little money that I can spend towards marketing? So I'll just give you a story as opposed to this is what you should do, because everybody's environment is different. Everybody's geographic range is different. Outpatient is not outpatient everywhere. So I'll just give you a little bit of a story on what we did in my practice. And this is after tons of trial and error and things. What we did in our practice was, we had relationships with physicians, because, once you've been around and you've been a clinician, certain doctors know you and you know certain doctors, right? And when they would give the business card out for our practice, they would give out multiple business cards. Our practice, other practices too, right? So a patient would have a choice of, let's say, 5 business cards that they would look at. They would look at ours and they would look at our logo and say, this looks really familiar. They don't know how it looks familiar. They don't know why it looks familiar. They just know it looks familiar. Okay. And that's where the marketing already started. You're building up something called Persuasion. Okay. Now, Robert Cialdini wrote a book on Persuasion. Now, how that works is, before that business card was handed out, what we were doing in the background was, for me, I had a program on News 12. Once a quarter, I would go on News 12, wear my company's logo shirt, which was my office, and I would give advice on how to shovel snow properly. What is the right shovel to buy? In the wintertime or in the summertime, it would be running techniques on how to stretch before running. It would just be those informational, right? But my logo would be there that I would be wearing. We would give community talks, and my company would be the one doing it, so they would see the logo. So Our company logo was in various different places. It could have been at a 5K run. It could have been at a different thing that we've done. If we're making t-shirts, people are wearing the t-shirts. Remember, these patients don't know where they saw us, but they remember that they've seen that somewhere. So what do? They're like, let me at least look into this on Google. Why Google? It's the number one search engine. They look us up on Google and they say, wow, these guys have more Google reviews than anybody else. This was all done ahead of time, right? We've had a lot of Google reviews. So then they feel more comfortable calling us. We accepted their insurance. We just made it that much easier. Our front desk was able to get them in within a normal time frame. They came into our clinic. When they walk into the waiting room, they look in the waiting room and they see hundreds of pictures of patients smiling with their therapist with a handwritten testimonial underneath it in a frame. So what is the impression that they get? They get this impression. I don't know what these guys do, but they must do a decent job if all these people are taking pictures and happy and satisfied. And these aren't professional athletes. These are normal people like me that have normal problems. That it was built before they even saw our business card. That's what's called persuasion. We got into their heads about how to get them to our office before actually they even got our business cards. Now, this takes time. Right? It takes diligence because we weren't spending money on doing these things. So it's a matter of consistently doing certain things. That's when it goes from marketing to now when the PT takes them back, it becomes a sales cycle. How to convince the patient that this is a problem that we can solve within a certain time frame. That's the sales cycle. But marketing was done up front. So the point to the whole thing is, there's things that we can do as small business owners to get our name and differentiate us in the marketplace, whereas large business, which I was a part of, we would spend money on marketing, SEO, Google ads, and things like that. So the small business practices have to really understand the grassroots efforts that they have to do, and usually, like me, I will put together a marketing plan that benefits them for their size practice and their type of practice. That's how I usually work with them one-on-one to try to help figure this out. And it's so funny because some of the stuff I tell them, they're like, oh, this is common sense, but they never did it because they're so close to the situation. They don't even realize it because, even me, like I have a business coach and they'll tell me something. I'm like, yeah, I knew that. He's like, yeah, why weren't you doing it? I'm like, I don't know why I wasn't doing that.
Yeah, you just need someone to guide you because it's overwhelming. It's just a lot going on.
It is. Yeah, that's exactly right, Marianne. You just said it. A lot going on.
Yeah. Okay. So then you have a structure, metrics. You are trying to, build process so you just don't have a job. Now you're thinking about marketing and then the sales. Anything else that I'm sure there are a lot, but like the basic things that people should be thinking about as business owners?
Yeah. So, we talk about the KPIs or the stats, but the main thing is track what you want to be able to change or track what you want to see progress. Like, what are the important factors? Obviously, if you're a company and you care about your patients, you care that your therapists are diligently treating patients in a way that's, how you built your practice. So you have to figure out, well, what are the important factors in that? Like what gets them from A to B to completion? Is it, and I'm making something up, is it we need to see our patients for 12 visits or 8 visits at minimum? Otherwise, we know we're not doing a good enough job. And I'm making these numbers up, right? Do we have to survey our patients every 3-4 visits to make sure that they're happy and satisfied with everything? So we know that we have touch points with them. Those are the things that you measure. Is it, that we want to have a certain amount of Google reviews done on a weekly basis with all our staff. So that way we stay top of mind. How do we keep getting these patients in? Obviously we all know you got to do a good job, but what defines a good job? Those are the things that a clinician has to kind of figure out in their own company. Like what defines a good job? What are your metrics? And that's what you need to keep on top of. So that way, as you go working on your business and you get further and further away from daily treatment, you're still able to monitor the practice, without the practice falling apart. Mm-hmm. Especially when you have more than one clinician and you're more than one office. How do you monitor everything so things are consistent across the board?
Yeah. Okay. And if people want to learn more about the topic, I know you mentioned a few books and I know you did a lot of courses. Do you have any resources that you recommend people go check?
I would honestly tell you, and I'll give everybody else my business email. Have a conversation with me because each practice circumstance is unique to them and what they're doing. Like I said, I talk to business owners who have, neuro practices. I have outpatient ortho practice, sports medicine practice, and everybody's unique. So the answer is very unique. It's not one like, go watch this YouTube video and you're going to get all the answers. I even put out tons of blogs and things like that. And it depends on the circumstance and what their unique things are. I have clinics that say we have a certain technique that we apply to all of our patients to get the best results, so their answers to them are going to be very different. But they have to be open-minded first, and they have to realize that what they don't know can hurt them. Sometimes as business owners, yeah, we know best. We know best. We need to do this. We need to do this. But, when you've been around other business coaches and when you've been coached yourself, you realize there's a lot that I thought I knew before that I really had no idea that this is the real way that it kind of works.
Mm-hmm. And so how does it work with our clients? Do you usually do like one-on-ones? Do you have like calls? How is that structured?
So most of my clients are all one-on-one clients. They have access to me via a cell phone, via text message, and then we will have, calls set up, frequent calls, video calls that will go over different things. They'll give me, I create a Google Drive where they keep their metrics in there so I can monitor their metrics, and then I can teach them, what I was taught about how to use these metrics, because we don't want it just to become more work for them. We want them to be able to use these metrics to actually help them manage their practice. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing. We're usually I'm helping them create a marketing plan for them, a business plan for them to get us started, and this is what we need to do. Now, I can tell you, Mariana, in every single circumstance, in every single thing, nothing ever goes smoothly, okay? Because in business, the moment that you're going good, something happens and you're like, oh, crap, I didn't see that coming. I got to deal with this fire. That is just normal business, okay? But the idea is if you constantly look back and you say, yeah, I'm doing better than I was when I first started. I'm doing better than I was, a couple weeks ago. That's the measure. Not like everything will not be smooth.
Yeah. Just be prepared.
Just be prepared. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And before we wrap up, anything else that you want to add to our conversation? I know we talked about a lot of different things. Anything else that you think it's important that we haven't mentioned?
I think if you're out there and you're considering going into private practice because you're passionate about your profession and you want to be able to do a good job, I think do not let any of what I just said scare you. I think you should really go in and really give it everything that you have, but be open to learning. That's the biggest thing. Be open to learning and have that hunger and passion, because there is a better way, and it doesn't mean that you're stuck in a rut, and that you're going to be doing 60, 80 hours like maybe some other people are. There is a better way, and I help people with that all the time. So, follow that passion that you have.
Awesome. And then if people want to find you, contact you, what is your website? What is the best way to reach you?
So I will definitely give you all that information so you can post it. But my website is www.agmgmtinc.com. It's so hard to remember that. So hopefully you have an area that you can actually click and then they can go to. Yeah. And my website and my email is just as confusing. So what I'll do is I'll give you my email, my website, my Instagram, and my LinkedIn stuff. So that way you can at least, put that so they can contact me, because I love having one-on-one conversations. I love these podcasts too, but I love digging into people's practices and helping them to try to strategize, what's best for them, or just having conversation.
Yeah, and people need help, because we all always trying to be better clinicians and provide the best care. And then once you realize, okay, I want to open a practice, you're like, well, how do I start? So we do need help. We don't learn those things in school. So I think it's really important. And I appreciate you taking the time to come here and share that with us, help us see a few things that, people like me, for example, have no idea. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great talking to you.
That's all for today's episode of PT Pro Talk. We hope you enjoyed this discussion. Be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when we release future episodes. You can also join our email list at ptprotalk.com to receive updates and access new episodes. If you have ever gotten value from the show, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. It always makes my day and it really helps us out. If you have any guests or topics you'd like to see on the show, let us know by answering a quick survey. You can find the link in the show notes, along with more information about our guests, resources, website, and social media. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.